United States Department of Agriculture.
Can start recording here. All right, thanks for joining us for the fifth webinar in our series on transdisciplinary approaches. My name is Jessica Shade. I'm a national program leader at USDA NIFA. I'm one of the organizers of the Transdisciplinary Approaches series, although the credit for putting this webinar together is shared with Doug Steele, the VP for Food, Ag, and Natural Resources at the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, and my fellow national program leader, Ashley Mueller. What this series sets out to do is highlight the opportunities and challenges of transdisciplinary approaches within agricultural research. We always include our non-discrimination statement in our deck because there's zero tolerance for discrimination at these events. This slide has contact information if you'd like to make a complaint. For those of you who aren't familiar with transdisciplinary approaches, or if you just want to learn a little bit more about the what and why of using transdisciplinary approaches, check out the recordings of our past webinars, which you can view on this NAL website. We also have another webinar in the series planned for December 11th, focused on effective evaluation of programs that use transdisciplinary approaches. You can register by using this QR code, and I'll also email everyone after the webinar with this link. I'm co-organizing the webinar with Allison Meadow, an associate research professor at the University of Arizona's Office of Societal Impact. So I just wanted to make a shout out to her since she's doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the content for this webinar. And please stick around after the presentation because we're going to have an evaluation poll where you can help us improve our webinars for the future, help identify topics that you'd be interested in seeing us focus on, etc. So stick around. We really do look at the results from these polls and use them to improve future webinars. Today, we have a powerhouse panel of land-grant university administrators who are going to share how they support faculty and staff in adopting transdisciplinary approaches, highlighting the opportunities and challenges that they faced, and talk about how to navigate multifaceted projects that support inclusivity and diverse perspectives to address the complex challenges facing food and ag systems today. We organized this webinar a little differently than we have past webinars in the series, based on those poll results I was telling you about. So as you are registering, I'm sure you noticed that we asked you to provide a question that you had for the speakers. We compiled those questions, broke them out into themes, and then used them to develop the scaffolding for the discussion today. So in that way, you as webinar participants guided the discussion that we're going to be having today. So thank you for your engagement. We hope it results in a panel that most accurately tackles the issues that you're interested in. We'll still have time for live questions and answers at the end of the session, so feel free to enter new questions as they arise in that Q&A tab. And I'm sorry we aren't able to answer all of the questions that we got, but we kind of grouped them into themes. So hopefully we're tackling the area that you asked a question about. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Marshall, our moderator.
And good afternoon, and thank you, Jessica. It's good to be with you folks today and to have this opportunity to reconnect with some great friends and people that I have had the privilege of working with across the land grant system. But before we get into that, I do want to add to Jessica's comments. We're excited to have, I think, over 1,100 people signed up for this webinar today. That's an extraordinary number and maybe the largest one I've ever done, certainly, in this setting. And certainly we're excited for folks not only in the land grant system, but also I know we have a lot of partners that are not in the land grant system, other universities, local partners, people that are figuring out ways to connect on transdisciplinary projects in different ways that have joined us today. So regardless of what your position may be in this whole ecosystem that we're working in today of partnerships and transdisciplinary work, we're excited to have you here. And we know this is going to be a great discussion with people that not only on this panel, but your ideas and what you want to bring forward in this time as we think about these global challenges and big issues and things that universities can do to bring change and to bring solutions to communities across the country and around the world. So we're excited about it. I do serve at Kansas State University as Executive Vice President and Chief of Staff. And my history, just quickly, is a background in higher education now for more years than I want to talk about, but have had the privilege of being at three great land-grant universities: North Carolina State University, the University of Missouri, and University of Missouri System, and now Kansas State University. A lot of that work focused on the external side of partnerships and dealing with extension and engagement across the higher education landscape. So it's been a lot of fun. Continues to be a lot of fun here as well. I'm also pleased today to have some other great people and friends joining me, and I'm going to give a quick intro to each of them. It will not in any way fully cover their incredible backgrounds and what they're able to do and what they have done and what they're continuing to do. But just so you have a sense of that, and as I talk to them and we get into the questions, I'm sure some of that history will come out and you'll begin to see the connections that all of us have built over the years between the panelists and how our paths have crossed. And so I'm going to quickly, first of all, introduce to you Dr. Robert Jones. He serves as Chancellor at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I have personally known him probably now for a little over a decade. Our paths first crossed at North Carolina State University when I was there, and then we were privileged to have him at the University of Missouri. Dr. Jones comes to us with an incredible life history, growing up in Georgia, Fort Valley State University, and then on to the University of Georgia for his master's degree, and then on to the University of Missouri in Columbia for his PhD. Noted scientist, 30-year career at the University of Minnesota, not only as a faculty member, but also as a noted administrator, doing some great work. And I know not only in engagement work, but in particular in the urban core there in Minneapolis-St. Paul area, has done some incredible work. Went on to the SUNY system and served there for a period of years before landing eventually at the University of Illinois. Since being there at Illinois, he's done some incredible work, though. If you look at philanthropy, for instance, $2.7 billion campaign that has been extraordinary in terms of their trajectory and where they're going, building new partnerships in the Chicago area, metropolitan area, and really beginning to build out a modern day land grant, if you will, in many ways, taking from those roots of the past, but moving it forward into a modern context. So you'll get to hear from this noted leader and certainly someone I consider to be a friend and mentor in many ways, Dr. Robert Jones. We're looking forward to that conversation. We're also glad to have with us today Wendy Powers. Wendy comes to us from from Washington State University. I was going to say University of California, but she was in California for many years. But Wendy is, again, a noted person, noted scientist. Before she got into administration, spent years at Michigan State University, had opportunities to do some wonderful things, not only there at Michigan State, but also, again, moving that career forward, animal scientist, center director, full professor, and as doing great work at Washington State University, where she is the Cashup Davis Family Endowed Dean of the College of Agriculture, Human and Natural Resources Sciences. Wendy, I had to get all that out. My intersection with Wendy has been through the Board of Ag Assembly and working through extension and working through those natural connections you get, but certainly a noted leader and someone that has risen through the ranks to certainly a high level now as a Dean of Agriculture in Washington State. Finally, a friend that I have been on a number of panels with. I was trying to recount, Jay, how many we've been on, but Jay Ackridge, first got to know him probably, again, about 10 or 12 years ago. Our paths began to cross. When I first met him, he had just become Dean of Agriculture at Purdue University, a noted ag economist. Had done some incredible work before becoming Dean, but then served as many years for Dean of Agriculture before making a move into the Provost office. Jay and I have been on several panels. I think the last one we were on, Jay, you actually moderated and I was a panelist. I will tell you, I think that's a whole lot more fun than having to moderate. So I think you got the better deal today. But Jay is a noted leader, has been incredibly important in our work in land-grant universities, in particular, I would say in the leadership realm. He has done a lot with Food Systems Leadership Institute and working with lots of things to grow the leadership, not only in higher ed, but also in the industry sector with lots of great work he's done in executive leadership. and all kinds of things in higher education. But certainly during his time at Purdue, oversaw a $2 billion budget, student enrollment over 50,000, 2,700 faculty members, and 8,000 staff. We all know that Purdue University is among those, as is Illinois, as is Washington State, and certainly Kansas State University. All have their distinctiveness and uniquenesses, but certainly all bring great value to this country and the world. So, Jay, it is good to see you and be back with you as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start off with Dr. Jones. I'm going to give you the first shot at this. I figure you're the chancellor, so I got to defer to you first. You're pulling rank today. But I knew he wouldn't like me saying that. But let's get started with Dr. Jones. And I think I'm just going to ask you the open-ended question is, why is transdisciplinary work important? You sit as a chancellor, great university, certainly have had great background, but why is it important as you look at the context of the times we live in, the global scene? Why is it important that we have this conversation?
Well, first of all, Marshall, let me say thank you all for allowing me to be here today. And this is something that is very much near and dear to me because I think transdisciplinary research is an absolute requirement in the times in which we live, because I believe most of the grand challenges we face as a nation, as a community, are too large and too complex for any one discipline to solve. And I also must say that I have benefited greatly from this transdisciplinary approach, because even within my first department as a 26-year-old PhD, Department of Agronomy and Plant Genetics, was a forward-looking department, and I was the last person hired to be part of a somewhat multidisciplinary team. They had a plant breeder and plant production person working on maize, corn, and I was hired as the plant physiologist. So this is at the core of my lived experience as a faculty member for 34 and a half years in Minnesota. Now let's roll it forward to University of Illinois, and I think it's fair to say University of Illinois is one of probably the world's first true interdisciplinary research institutes, and that is the Beckman Institute. And if you spend any time in any kind of laboratory environment, the word Beckman should resonate with you, because I had more pieces of Beckman equipment in my lab that you can shake a stick at. And now I'm at the university where Mr. Beckman received his educational training, and so generously gave back to create the Beckman Institute, which 40 years ago was the first of 10 multidisciplinary institutes that we've established here at the University of Illinois. So perhaps as much or more so than most places, that Illinois multidisciplinary approaches are at the absolute core of what we think and how we approach partnerships and problem solving. As I said, there are 10 institutes that are campus-wide, and I call them the connective tissues across our 16 collegiate units. And they are clearly have been expanded as a part of our strategic planning process that started in 2013. They have driven our sponsored research portfolio up from last year at $691 million to $755 million. That's nearly a 10% growth. And so it's a way of being for this university. Everything we do, every approach we take is through the lens of bringing multiple disciplines to the table. And it really has served us well and has made a difference in terms of how we think about research and innovation, and it's impacted how we recruit and retain faculty as well.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jones. Wendy, I want to go to you next. I know not only have you been extremely active in this space at Washington State University, but I know when you were at the University of California system, you were Associate Vice President for Food and Agriculture and working in that space as well. When you think about this, I'll ask you a similar question. Why is this important? As you think about framing it up for your faculty and people you work with now and have in the past, why is it important that we focus on this topic today?
Thanks, Marshall. Like Robert, I think this really is the cornerstone of what a land grant institution is all about. And key to this is really having that impact, being able to say, how are we making a difference for the people that we serve all across our states, all across the world? For me as a faculty member, I spent 20 years with a primary extension appointment, but a heavy and large research lab at the same time. As a faculty member, knowing the why helped keep me focused on what was important, what should I be working on, and having that interdisciplinary approach with colleagues who were field-based, county-based, campus-based, and everything from fundamental research all the way to 100% extension really helped me see where was I going and what difference was I going to make. So that at the end of the day, I could use my time best and we could use our resources to the best of the ability. I think faculty are challenged with bandwidth issues. So staying focused and knowing where you're going to make a difference and knowing where the problems are is really key to making the best use of our time and our resources. And I think it's that interconnectedness between all of the missions and different areas of disciplinary expertise that helps get us the furthest down the road fastest so that we can really be solving some of these complex societal wicked problems of the world, if you will. I think the other part of that is making sure that we are approaching things with a multidisciplinary lens from an expertise area so that not only are we taking it from discovery through implementation and impact, but we're looking at the whole picture as these problems become broader and more complex in scope. So I think it's what helps us come back and say why we're here and really help people understand the value of a higher ed institution and all components of it, whether it's the fundamental research, the extension part of it, and certainly we can't leave out the teaching part of it in helping the next generation move forward in solving these complex problems.
Well, thank you, Wendy. Jay, you get to take a shot at this as well, because again, different perspective, different journey in some ways. When you think about this topic, why do you see it as important as we move forward in higher education?
Sure, Marshall. And I just couldn't agree more with what Robert and Wendy said. And thinking broadly about, the theme for today's webinar, the last few years have been tough ones for higher education. And we've certainly seen diminished public trust in higher education as an institution. And, I think that's concerning for all of us. And those individuals on this webinar, I'm sure, are very familiar with some of the reasons, that are underneath that. But you think about the transdisciplinary approach, especially drawing on extension and engagement and building relationships with the communities we serve, the stakeholders we serve. I think that's an avenue for rebuilding trust and reconnecting with, again, those that can benefit from what we do, and we can benefit from what they bring to these difficult problems that we're all trying to solve. So it's an opportunity to bring the outside in to our institutions. And I think that this work by building, again, relationships, building trust with stakeholders, with communities is those are steps towards rebuilding and maybe reestablishing trust more broadly among the public.
Yeah, I think it's great comments by all three. And Wendy, I'm going to go back to you. You mentioned something that I think is really important that I heard Robert and Jay talk about in different ways. But you talked about knowing the why we do it, and you also talked about the words implementation, but also the impact. Unpack that a little bit for me. Talk about that why and how your role and the roles you've been in particular coming out of the extension background, how maybe that was helpful to you as you thought about how to build teams and how to put those kind of relationships together.
Yeah. So, I think one of the great things about his extension is that in each of our states and across the country, it's really distributed, and it is building those relationships that Jay talked about. Having those relationships with the community partners helps us understand what are the challenges that they're facing and what could actually work in solving some of those challenges. And so to get at that, you need to know, why is it that I'm doing something? Why am I running this scenario in my laboratory? Why am I including this in my curriculum? And why, as an extension professional, if that's my role, am I actually dedicating time and effort to this challenge? Many times those challenges are going to be place-based, and that's why it's so critical to keep building those partnerships. That place-based nature of these solutions then lends itself to needing to have unique solutions. And so it backs it up to helping to figure out, well, what is the impact we were going to have? What's success going to look like? Because as we look at our different varieties of partners, success means something very differently to them. And we need to make sure that this is not a top-down approach where we're going into the lab, we're discovering something, and we're saying, here's your answer, because that's not the solution that's going to work for our communities and for our partners. So we have to know the why, we have to know the impact that we're seeking, and from there, we can start charting the course to get there. And that's where the trust comes in as well. Again, that top-down approach doesn't build the trust that Jay talked about. It's not going to help solve any of the problems because solutions won't be implemented. So it has to be this recurring conversation, building of trust, building of relationship, but all very much, in my opinion, focused on knowing what we want to see at the end that we call success, and then what approaches could work to actually get us there.
Very good. Robert, I want to go back to you, and I know a little bit, I'm going to claim a little bit of insider here because I have spent a little time with you. I know that you were very intentional in your background, not only where you are now in Illinois, but also in New York when you were there with SUNY system, but also when you were at University of Minnesota as well, about the intentionality of going in and listening to the community and hearing what they have to say and letting that inform it. Walk us through that, because that's sort of the core of this interdisciplinary work around and transdisciplinary work around problem solving and solution finding. So give us some sense of that.
Well, Marshall, I appreciate the question because I think that for me, that was a fundamental shift in the thinking around the work that Extension has done historically. You know, a lot of times it was interpreted that you're from the university, you have all the knowledge and the expertise, and we're here to help. And at Minnesota, we decided to fundamentally turn that pyramid on its head. And because we recognize that there's a lot of knowledge in communities, but we haven't used the approaches in the past that would leverage that community and provide a framework that community would see themselves as an equal partner in the work that's being done together, rather than them being a recipient of our knowledge and our expertise. And I can tell you it was a fundamental shift for me, and we did it through something called the Urban Research Outreach and Engagement Center that we created in Minneapolis, primarily because, like most land grants, we had research and outreach centers, extension offices in every geographical region. But the university as a whole did not have a urban strategy. And so UROC, the Urban Research Outreach and Engagement Strategy or structure, was created to send a very strong message that as far as our extension and outreach activity and public engagement activities, we were going to think and act on urban issues differently. The first thing we populated in that $2 million renovated building was the extension educators that were scattered in the southwestern part of Minneapolis. And we brought them to the heart of the inner city where they could do their work with a SNAP program in there, demonstration kitchen, and the whole 9 yards. And it's back to what Wendy said. That was our why. You know, in Minnesota, as a land grant university, one of the few land grant located in a major metropolitan area, and to not have a clear focus on the urban community from where myself and my team and the president at the time, Bob Brunix, we thought that that was an oversight. And the community told us it was an oversight. You know, you come over here, you send a few professors to do research on our children and on our community, but you don't even share the data back with us. So I said all this to say, to me, that was a fundamental shift in terms of how I think about the very successful model of extension and how you juxtapose that with a strong commitment of public engagement really has transformed how I look at the issue and how I've tried to implement this work, not only at Albany, but here at the University of Illinois as well.
So, Jay, as you think about it, I know that you've done a lot of work in this space too, and you've had to build that trust with those local clients and thinking about farmers or other groups you might have dealt with locally. How do you build that trust? What does that look like from your time as a faculty member all the way up to administration? How do you build that trust?
Yeah, so the vice provost for engagement here, when I was provost, had a saying. He said, we need to stop treating our community partners as subjects and treat them as colleagues and partners. And that's a mindset shift. I think it builds on what Robert was saying. I mean, too frequently you got this idea that I've got a study to do and I need people to go and be part of it, but they're not partners and they're not colleagues. You're treating them as subjects of the study. And I think so. It starts with this fundamental idea of respect. And these individuals, these groups, these stakeholders, again, they bring their problems, they bring their resources to the table, and give us an opportunity to work together to do something that's important for their community. And part of that respect means respecting their time. It means respecting the resources they have and don't have. It means becoming easy to work with so that we don't put barriers up and that get in the way of them engaging with us on projects. To Robert's point, it means communications. It means getting back with them in a timely way and being responsive and letting them know what's going on. And when things are wrapped up, letting them know that and keeping them fully engaged throughout. And so, I think ultimately the key word for me is respect. I mean, there's a lot of specific ways we can go about doing that, Marshall. I'll be glad to expand on those later. But maybe I'll stop there, because I think if you start with the proper mindset, and you think about them as partners, and you think about how you're going to bring them to the table as an equal, and that we're going to do this together, it really does start to shape how you structure the interaction and how you think about the world from their perspective so that they can contribute all that they can to a particular initiative.
Robert, you got a thought on your mind there. I can see it. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, Jay really prompted something that I always say every time we have conversations in this regard. Public engagement, extension work to be highly effective are based on two critical factors, and that is trust. If you don't take time to build the trust in the community, you're not going to go anywhere. And the second one is mutuality. There has to be mutual benefit. Benefit from the university from its basic responsibility as a land grant university, but also the community has to benefit. And when we were working with the community in North Minneapolis, they made clear to emphasize that they wanted to own whatever data we generated. And at first, as an academic, that kind of frightened me a little bit. I didn't know exactly what they meant by own it. But it was the basic fundamental issue. You want to do research with us or own us, and then you don't report back the findings and where we could use those findings to solve a problem in the community, create a new program, or go to the legislature and create some additional funding. So I thought I'd take advantage of, I know it wasn't my turn, but we're having a conversation here. So I just wanted to build on what Jay was saying there. That is absolutely critical. The trust is absolutely critical, and it has to be some mutual benefit.
Wendy, go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, thank you. I think the thing that I think about related to this question, though, and I agree with everything I've heard, is how do we make it live beyond a project, right? Because that trust requires sustained engagement.
Yep.
It's got to be something long-term. I've traveled places where they say, until you've been there 3 times, we don't believe you're ever going to come back and you really want to help us. So how do you do that when we live in this project world? And so that's one of the things I've been thinking about, because it is a bandwidth, unless we can really tip everything upside down and approach everything we do in higher ed from a different lens, where the lead is the community engagement and everything else follows behind it. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there, because I'd love to see if any of my esteemed colleagues have an answer, and you can get back to me afterwards if need be.
Yeah. Jay, thought on that?
Yeah. So I can't agree more, Wendy. And I think it's especially true. You get leadership changes, you get turnover in particular communities, and and now you almost are starting over again. And it takes a really deliberate effort to do that. One of the things that we started doing that I think's helped with continuity, and it was under the previous Vice Provost for Engagement, Steve Abel, was an engagement summit where we basically carved out a day. We invited partners to campus. We shared ideas with them. They shared ideas with us. There was tons of time for networking. And I think that annual, cadence for this particular event just kept us connected with folks. Even when there was leadership change, they would send someone else. And so, all of these institutions represented, I'm sure our listeners today are doing something like that. But I think you can create activities like that one that are again on some regular cadence that can help you again steer through Wendy's challenge, which I think is very real.
Yeah, let's. I want to take y'all. I know that bringing these folks together. Again, my own background. We did a similar thing. When I was at the University of Missouri, created Extension and Engagement Week, and then that was when our traditional Extension conference was going on. We expanded that to include all the engaged faculty on campus and partners to come in. It was a pretty big change. Just in all transparency, we're doing that right now at Kansas State. That'll be announced in the next week or so that we're doing it here. So a little pre-news coming out, but it's very important that you open up that door and allow that sort of that new freshness come in. And what it does, it invigorates what's there. It has a very interesting effect. But one of the challenges I do see, and I know it was one of the questions that came in, is how do we get more faculty teams? How do we get more of our folks that are on the campuses to get bigger, more engaged in? Jay, I'm going to let you lead off with this one, then we'll go around to Wendy and back up to Robert. So how do we get more transdisciplinary teams, complex teams? How, as an administrator, you've sat there, how do you stimulate that and make that work?
Yeah, there's, I think, a lot to this question, and I'm guessing we'll spend a little bit of time on it. But, clearly some things like seed funding, projects, all this kind of thing is a piece of it. But at some fundamental level, it's about faculty leadership as well. And I think one of the initiatives that I think we've seen some success with is a couple of different programs, Societal Impact Fellows and Engagement Fellows, which, again, brings individual faculty members to the middle, to the center of the campus that have an interest in doing this. But it is a leadership exercise, and you need some education, some training in how to build these kind of teams, how to have the communications that cuts across disciplines and into the community. How do you do project management for faculty disciplines that particular skill is not part of the whole process? What are some of those things that build trust? And so by bringing individuals together, giving them professional development, giving them mentors to help them, again, get skilled up in the area, then they can go back and, one, be ambassadors for the work in the units. And maybe just as importantly, or more importantly, is lead these projects well, because, a challenge, I think, within these projects, they're not straightforward activities. They're complicated, and it takes some leadership skill to make sure that they're moving forward. And I think to address that, programs like that can be a way to build both faculty interest and capacity so that these efforts can be successful.
Wendy, you want to take a shot at that, how to build these teams out?
Yeah, I think extension often has structured around either commodities or issues. And imagine if we could take the issue approach for extension and expand that out. And I'm going to go a little bit off the rails here, Marshall. Please don't disconnect me. But what if we could be nimble enough that we could structure higher ed, our institution, around an issue?
Yep.
And you sign on to work with the issue, whether you're a plant pathologist, a history major, a department of English. Everybody's focused on the issue and trying to solve that issue. Across extension, across research, across extension, everybody's working together around a dozen big topics, wicked problems. That's the approach I think we should be thinking about. Maybe program teams, issue teams shouldn't be refined to just extension. Maybe we should, in an incremental way, be taking that into our colleges, our institutions, and saying everybody signs on regardless of what your appointment is, and you're working to solve this issue, and you're working in a transdisciplinary way where that transdiscipline is not only mission, teaching, research, and extension, but also area of field of expertise. Maybe we make headway that way, and there's an easier way or a more controlled way, if you will, to engage with our communities and our partners from around our geographic areas.
Robert, thoughts on this? I mean, I know building these teams, I know it's important to you.
Well, let me say from where I sit, I think there are about three important things that you have to do in order to get faculty to really be excited about this type of work. And I think a lot of it has to do with back to what Wendy was saying. It's got to be beyond your typical commodity approach to maybe issues that are important to community and should be important to the university. Just one example, just one example I think is to use the same approach that we use in other places in the academy, like cluster hiring, if you will. That's one of the strategies we had started back in 2018. We wanted to build more capacity in a very broad multidisciplinary way around trying to strengthen our international profile in microbial sciences and research and education. And so we use a cluster hiring approach that has now resulted in, broadly speaking, we already had some people in the community that were doing this, on the university that were doing it. We now have over 300 members representing 50 campus units that are all pulling together, working on this issue because we use a more multi or transdisciplinary approach. Then the other thing too is so you got to make these opportunities, you got to be intentional and strategic about them, make them attractive. One of the most attractive components is to make sure that there's clarity in the promotion and tenure process.
Yeah.
For most of us, that is still the badge of honor that we seek, and this work cannot be treated any differently. So in 2022, we stepped out and did something I didn't think was possible to do. My hats off to my former provost, Andreas Cangelaris, who painstakingly navigated this through. I won't say pushed this through, but navigated it through to get everybody involved. So there's great clarity that all kinds of research and innovation, whether it's individual research and innovation or it's team research, engaged research, is clearly spelled out. And you're clear on the front end of how this is going to count toward promotion and tenure. I will stop there because that one is huge. We have to have that clarity. And then, of course, you got to make sure that the budget model, the research and indirect cost recovery model also aligns and provide that kind of clarity so that this type of work is not treated differently. Because, typically the rates are low, if they exist at all, in some of this work. So you have to have clarity as well. You got to treat it like any other core discipline or any core objective the university might embark upon.
Yeah, if I can give an example as well, one of the things you learn when you come to Kansas is that one of the biggest issues here is water, just straight out water. So we knew coming in that President Richard Linton had seen this really quickly in his going around the state. It was going to be an enormous issue, way overdue to do something about it in a very targeted, strategic way. So we took it on and have taken it on. And to give you an example, I think this would be a really good example of what you guys have just talked about. We did a call on our campus to figure out how many people here are involved in some type of water initiative, research, interest. They're doing something. We found there were 75 faculty across every single college. It wasn't just the College of Agriculture and the College of Engineering. It was every college, arts and sciences, education, health and human sciences. Everybody had somebody working on some aspect of water, whether it be a technical issue in irrigation or what have you. And if you think about traditional ag, or if it be something dealing with behavioral sciences, 75 faculty, put them all in a room. We created the Kansas Water Institute, announced it. The legislature came in, provided $5 million recurring That means permanent, folks. And so we are off and running, and we are partnering, interestingly enough, y'all brought this up too, with two other universities, the University of Kansas and Lawrence. Yes, we are partnering with the University of Kansas on this initiative. And kudos to our friend Robert Jones on what you guys did over the weekend to the University of Kansas. Good job there. Thank you. We're also partnering with a smaller regional university, Fort Hays State University, with some of their expertise. So what we've done here is built this collaborative that is transdisciplinary. It is also multi-institutional, and it also runs through our extension system because we have a presence in 105 counties. So we're able to push that out through our research and extension system. Probably as clean a model as you'll ever see in terms of seeing the money show up when the idea was right. So I wanted to throw that one in there because I think, as all of you have talked about specifics around that, I think that's an idea. Robert, you may want to jump in on that.
I do want to jump in because you just touched on something. I just made a hasty retreat, Jay, from Purdue. I was there for the competitiveness conversation and had a chance to join my colleague, the president there, and Paul Karn from Oregon. And one of the questions we got into was, in this whole chips and science effort, but it's also very much true for the example you gave, Marshall, is they're starting to use a term that was coined by the president of I just blanked on the institution now, but he coined the term radical partnerships. Yep. And this is Daniel Diermeyer. Yeah. Daniel coined this term. And that's exactly, folks, we're doing it in the whole quantum computing, chips and science. We got to do it more on the food and food security and the land grant sector, where you form these radical partnership with entities that you normally would be competing against. Absolutely. Because again, the challenges that face and plague our society are too large and too complex for any one university to do alone. And so we're very, very proud here that we partnered initially with University of Chicago to do something on quantum computing. That led to a bigger initiative on health and the health biosciences with Northwestern and Chicago. And it led to the governor having immense trust that this public land grant university is now leading a lot of the innovation agenda for the state of Illinois that cuts across many different sectors, not just engineering, but is through our IFAB, that has to do with fermentation and bioprocessing. And so there's a lot that can be done if we start to think about who we partnership. Mm-hmm. It really does need to be radical. It needs to be business as unusual. And I can tell you that's the way that most of our challenges are going to be, have to be addressed across the board in higher education.
Wendy, I know you've done some work in this space and had some projects along the way. I'd be interested in maybe you sharing a project or two that you saw as interesting and maybe something that failed too. I think that's one of the things we got to talk about too. Sometimes these things don't work out, but I am finding a lot of interest in what's going on here. So thoughts or maybe a case study or something that you may have seen.
Yeah, I think one that I saw when I was serving as ECOP chair was a partnership between National Extension and the CDC around immunization. Yep. And states took part of this all across the country. I think it's been a really successful partnership. Michelle Rogers from the University of Delaware was somebody who really led that. It took a long time to build that relationship with CDC, but I think it's something that's going to have long-lasting implications that people can participate in different ways based on their local needs and opportunities. And so that Excite program, which we're still starting to see the impacts from that programs from many different states. Example, in Washington State, it brought together partners from colleges that maybe hadn't worked together before, all under the work of trying to increase immunization rates in communities where they had been low. So I think that's an example where it was a new partnership between Extension and CDC that is going to have big payoffs going down the road, but also set a course for how do we do this with other organizations. And it doesn't have to be at the national level. It can be at a regional, a state, a county, a community level. But I think it's one that we could look to. How did we build that? How have we seen the impacts? How did we get the buy-in? And how did that translate into addressing the why that at that time was immunization and preparedness against COVID? So that would be one that I think has worked.
Yeah. Go ahead. Jay, suggest thoughts of something maybe you've seen work in your time and working in this space.
Well, so one I might call out when I was dean, the university made a major commitment towards plant sciences. And I think the reason behind that was there was a lot of thought given to very specific areas of investment that would bring in partners. So we put a lot of money into basic plant sciences here to bolster our capacity and create a center for plant biology. But the initiative had as part of it a teaching initiative to grow the number of students, undergraduate students in plant sciences that could go back into that industry. It had an element around commercialization so that new developments in the plant sciences space could be turned into licenses and or startups. And we really brought in our Indiana corn and soybean producers in a major way, and they helped fund an applied innovation lab out on our agronomy center, and then also put some money into specific projects that this entity would ultimately work on. And so in the end, it was a really nice example, and it wasn't so radical, I think, Robert, because these are good partners for us anyway, but I think it helped us take that partnership to a new level because we invested in things we needed to bring to the table. They put money into specific areas our farmers in this state were very interested in, and jointly we were able to do things that obviously we wouldn't have been able to do without this kind of a partnership.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Again, guys, whether it's within, as you think about this, as your participants today listening in on this, and I know some of you are probably beginning to want to send some questions in, and we're going to take those in just a moment here. I think the four of us could probably talk all day long. It's so good to be with you guys and to have these kind of conversations. But I think about it, whether it be within a college or a unit. Sometimes we think about interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary being, people that are way apart. Sometimes it's people across the hall from each other that need to talk. Then it can be across college or across department, or then it can be across university, or it can be across nation and globe, actually. There's all kinds of ways, there's levels of this and layers. One of the things that I think about again here that we begin to work with is rural health. Rural health is one of those other big blinking lights that we see. It's not just in Kansas, it's national. There's a shortage of rural doctors, rural physicians assistants. And so we are working, we actually just signed a memorandum of understanding with the University of Kansas Health System as well to begin to work in that space. And that's going to be incredible. We actually had the executive dean, the dean of the School of Medicine, College of Medicine here on a different level of that. The Kansas Health System is a separate entity from the University of Kansas here, but they do cross-pollinate and use the same faculty working as MDs and clinicians and working on that side. So there's just so many ways you can take this. And I think Wendy, what you said earlier, as we kind of put maybe an exclamation point on this one, is let the issue drive it. We've got to become very issue driven. And here, and I know this is not unique to us, but we are setting up a series of institutes so we become more issue driven. Sometimes colleges, departments, our structures sometimes kind of get in the way, and we got to get some way to get around that and to make that better. And our colleges, quite frankly, are seeing that and beginning to work more cohesively because of it, I think. I think you stimulate that. You see a way to go forward, and people see resources going there. Again, lining up tenure promotion, lining up all these systems. Robert, you talked about the budget model, having to support these kinds of things. All those things, there's just a lot of levers you can pull, and it's not one thing, but it's multiple things. And I would sort of put a capstone on it, and I want to ask you guys this question. How do you create a culture around this? Because what you're talking about is cultural change. This is a new way, it's a different way of thinking for some. So Wendy, I'll start with you. How do you change culture? How do you get extension culture? I'll use extension. Extension culture is very much has its own culture. I won't say it's traditional, but it has its own culture. How do we move that culture? How do we move the academic culture? How do we move culture within a university? maybe some thoughts on that as we maybe go to some of our questions coming in now from the field. Let's end up with culture before we get to that. Culture.
Well, no doubt it's difficult and it takes a lot of time. It needs a lot of incentives. I think the promotion and tenure recognition of the value of working in a transdisciplinary environment is really key to that. And I think Robert talked about that a little bit earlier. And so that has to be built into the system, that this is rewarded. And, one key thing is asking everybody to be able to document their impacts, whether it's them as an individual or, more importantly, as part of a team, regardless, again, what their appointment is and their role in the university. But I think also, identifying what the compelling issue is and identifying issues that people want to get around and help be part of. Right now we're talking about, should every person that's field-based, maybe primary extension appointment, also have an affiliate appointment in a department or in a discipline area, and vice versa. Should everyone who's maybe 100% teaching or 100% research or some sort of split appointment have an affiliate appointment in extension? So that there is this opportunity to help people make those connections, because I think that's what's important. If you want to do community engaged research, you need to have an entry into those communities and somebody who is a long-term member of communities and has some of that trust built. And, I made a note, Marshall, of your annual engagement summit, because I think that is that step to building that ongoing. Whether people change or not, there is this mechanism in place to maintain that trust and that communication. And so I think, I think we're in a society today where students want to be part of that. They want to be issue-based. I think our faculty very much want to do that. And we just have to set up the structures and reward people for being part of that. With time, I think the culture will change. And of course, we all know there's going to be people that don't want to be part of that right away. But I think over time that will change if we're rewarding it, if we're putting resources behind it, and if we are standing up and saying, this is what's important and this is who we are.
So, Robert, take that question of culture. You've seen it in 3 different universities now. How do you, what levers do you pull to begin to move that?
I think in addition to what Wendy said and what I said earlier, I guess I would go back and emphasize the importance of the culture being changed incrementally by what is reflected in your strategic plan. And I think all of us have been around higher education long enough to know that if you're just doing planning for planning's sake, then you're probably just wasting everyone's time. But if you come up with a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan that has deep engagement across all those that are willing to come shape that plan, and then when you implement the plan, it has to have some kind of benchmarks and metrics to know if it's working. But one of the things to bring about the cultural shift, and I'll emphasize this again, is what you invest in. Because for us, our strategic plan is a roadmap for the future. If it isn't flagged in our strategic plan, it's probably not going to happen. And if it is flagged in our strategic plan, we allocate the resources very intentionally and strategically to invest in those areas to make sure they have impact. And over time, that will start to shift the culture in terms of how people look at some of these unusual or radical ideas about working together.
Jay, thoughts on culture?
Yeah, I think can't add too much to what Robert and Wendy said. I mean, what senior leadership talks about and celebrates matters a lot. I mean, in the end, it reflects importance. And as Robert said, if it's in the plan and it's got resources behind it, that sends a really strong message as well. And I think part of it's targeting those resources in the right places so that you know where the pain points are to this kind of work, and you get those barriers out of the way so that faculty can pursue this work successfully. And to Wendy's point, knowing they're going to be rewarded for doing it. And I think that's a really important piece of it. One thing we've started lately under a vice president for engagement is an engaged college program to really drive this into the units, where they step back and do an assessment of where they're engaged and maybe where they're not. They put together some plans to Robert's point about this. they agree on a set of metrics focused on impact for the communities they serve. And then there's a roll up of that to the campus, and really trying to move this into action plans into the units to help them really get their head around what engaged scholarship is, what engaged transdisciplinary work is, what it means for their college, and how to get them on board moving it ahead. And in the process, I think you start to unearth some of those pain points to say, hey, if we were to shift a few resources here, boy, we would really get a barrier out of the way that would allow more of this work to happen. And I think, to Robert's point, over time, you keep pushing at this, and you do move culture.
So there's really three things that I've heard. One is to incentivize and make sure the right incentives are there, and as Jay, as you articulated, what is celebrated by administration is going to have a lot of weight in that. Another piece is that whole budget model to make sure that's aligned correctly. And Robert, I heard you talk about too, the strategic plan in particular, making sure that it's in there. And one of the things I would say to all of our colleagues across the country, a lot of times when strategic planning is going on, people say, well, I don't want to get involved in that. Folks, that is the wrong conversation. You need to get involved. If you don't have a oar in the water when that's going on, the boat's going to leave you behind. So you need to get involved in those conversations. And then lastly, certainly, Wendy, you've talked about those two things, but you've also talked about the need to connect with community and understand it from their perspective. And, an example that strikes me is when I first came to Kansas State University, I had the opportunity to go with our president to DC. Part of what I do is government relations and working in that space as well. And one of the things, we walked in our first visit, and many of you know Rich Linton. He looked at me and said, go ahead and leave, whatever you think. Walked in, and I asked our first district United States Congressman, Tracy Mann, sat down across from him. I'd never met him before in my life. I looked straight at him and I said, Congressman, I said, want to ask you a question before we get started. And he said, what's that? I said, what's important to you? And he looked at me, he said, nobody's ever asked me that. He said, my goodness. So he articulated three things. He said, there's three things that we're really interested in. We're really interested in childcare, housing, and rural health. Now, it's a big district. It's called the Big First, covers 2/3 of the state or more. Incredible size just in terms of geography. We then went to three other congressional offices. There's only 4 in Kansas, and all three of them gave us the same three issues. We then went to two United States Senators' offices, asked the same questions, same issues. So what do you think we're interested in at Kansas State University? We got a lot of interest in child care. We're really interested in housing. We're interested in rural health because, quite frankly, that they're looking at polling data, quite frankly, and that's important for us because that's what matters to the constituents of whom we all serve. I use that as sort of an artifact that we all need to go in with questions, not so much solutions. And I think still there's this legacy of us knowing more than the community and bringing it in. And if you've heard anything today, folks, as we go to these questions from the field, I hope it's that we need to listen more and probably talk a little bit less, and we'd be probably better off. So I'm going to take some questions here. And one of the questions that came in I thought was really interesting is, please talk more about metrics around engagement. Have they been integrated into institutionalizing of transdisciplinary work in your institution? And I know, Jay, you guys have done a lot of that. It may start with you, then go up to Robert, then around to Wendy. So, Jay, why don't you take that one first?
Sure. Yeah, I think we did spend quite a bit of time working to really define engaged scholarship and what that means here. In terms of creative work, innovative work, work that could be, replicated by peers, and work ultimately that had impact, and thinking about what impact means, because it means, a lot of different things depending on one's discipline, everything from IP and commercialization on the one hand to perhaps business startups to again, addressing some public health concern and showing some difference you made on that particular issue. And so that was one that's, and then we basically institutionalized that in a guide called the guide is the actual title of the publication. It's available on the website, and it was intended to both define, engaged scholarship, what it meant here, what the metrics were, and then to help faculty members tell their own stories about the problem they worked on, the approach that they used, and ultimately the impact they made, the difference they made on that particular issue. And so it's in the end, this scholarship is rigorous, it's creative, and it's something that I think needs to be rewarded. And it doesn't necessarily always fit within some of our traditional bounds. But I think, with good heads coming together, you can certainly define what that means, and that starts to lower faculty barriers to getting involved. If they understand how this work's going to be evaluated, they're much more likely to be involved in engaged scholarship, and I think that's a point that both Wendy and Robert have made.
Yeah.
Robert?
I really don't have anything to add to my colleagues' summary of that. I think that you did a great job summarizing that. I really don't have much to add to that because you have to have some way to document the impact of what you're doing. Otherwise, there's no way to justify continued funding or additional funding. Without it, it just becomes just another project. And resources are too tight to just be doing another project just because it makes someone feel good. It doesn't have the impact, we shouldn't be doing it.
Wendy, any thoughts you have on measuring that impact? I know you worked in the ECOP world quite a bit. Thoughts?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work when I was at the University of California and now at Washington State, where we're talking about impact and how do we actually develop that story that Jay alluded to. And so, what we're finding is that in some cases it's an individual developing their story. In other cases, it's a team. And in many cases, it's a multi-year story. Nothing happens immediately. And I think that's really key to helping our faculty understand what this is. Impact is the sum of everything you've done to try and affect an outcome. It's not one thing. You didn't do a meeting. You didn't write a publication. It's everything you've done leading up to a condition change. And so really helping our faculty understand that. And, we've got some great stories where it's, working with a family through our SNAP Ed program and seeing how their food bill has changed and their health has improved to, we have an Institute of Biological Chemistry here at Washington State. That's a fundamental research unit. Yet as a result of that fundamental research, they can show that 20 years later, they have one of the leading cancer drugs used right now in the industry. And so it's being able to show that whole story about how did the work we were doing make a difference in the lives of people all across the world. And quantitative is great, and I'm biased in that I like quantitative because it makes an impact story, but it's really not about dollars. It's about knowing the magnitude of impact you've made because it can then be extrapolated. And so we've worked on developing what would metrics be at a high level, and we form them around condition changes. So that everybody's aggregating their impact stories around those condition changes. It's not about a numerical number as well as having this collective story so that when we launch our tour of impacts next month, there's themes of how we're making a difference in the work that we're doing across Washington and beyond, for example.
Very good. I've got one of the questions that came in here is if I'm an extension agent, a field faculty person sitting out in the state, and I've got an idea, or maybe I'm a faculty member on campus, but assistant professor, associate professor, and I think, man, this is a great idea, but I don't know how to move that idea up. Now, how do I get it to where a dean, a provost, a chancellor, a vice president would see it and say, hey, we need to do something about that? What have you seen? And Robert, I'll start with you. How does somebody that says, man, this is something this university ought to be about, how do I get that to come up so that it gets the attention maybe and gets through the clutter and the noise of the university?
Well, I think the way it happens, because you can't wait for next iteration of your strategic plan, because sometimes things just happen in the course of going about doing our work in the academy. And so I think it needs to be communicated quite clearly that this type of, when ideas come from someone in the faculty or from the community, there needs to be clarity about who do you reach out to.
Okay.
And clearly that needs to be our extension office or somebody in the Office for Public Engagement, because if they have built capacity and have communicated the work that we're embarking upon, then people should be able to see that as the first point of departure when you want to bring a new idea. I mean, we got to stop being so. I think we all admit, well, we got one person that's not, and you don't have this problem out in Washington, Wendy. We're too Midwest modest for our own good. And so we think it's bragging when we tell our story. And I can tell you, branding and marketing and communicating your values, what you care about, what are the core projects you are driving, then provides an opportunity for people to connect with those ideas, hopefully in a very seamless way. But you got to tell the story of what you're doing. Otherwise, it's that proverbial tree falling in the forest, and you know the rest of the story.
Jay, I'm going to take another question here. It's a similar one, but so if somebody starts an initiative and they get it going and it's great, and then we steal them from Purdue University. We bring them to Kansas State so that person's gone. How do you sustain that when you've got, it happens in universities constantly. We're constantly stealing from each other and recruiting heavily, great talent. So how do you sustain that when there's that change in that person that maybe connected well with the community and suddenly they're gone?
Yeah, well, I mean, so a couple things. One, you'd like to have leadership more than one deep, and so, I mean, thinking from the get-go about how you're bringing others involved, getting them engaged, getting them experience, getting them exposed, Marshall, so that, if the person that's doing, corn diseases in your state gets plucked away, there's at least somebody there that the corn producers know that they can call. So some of it's around just being intentional with succession planning, and some of it is obviously knowing these areas are so important, and some of them are that you're going to find a way to keep them going. I mean, you're going to pull somebody else in to manage the transition, and then you're going to be very aggressive about filling the slot because that relationship is so critical. It's just not one that can end because somebody transitioned, because it's going to happen. So, I mean, those are a couple of things. I think just making sure you got some bench strength, that bench strength is engaged as well, that people know who they are, and that, when transitions happen, and they do, you've got a bit of a plan there whenever you can to help, again, get you through a transition so maybe you can get a new resource in place that can build a relationship.
Wendy, one of the questions that came in is, what do we do when there's a controversial topic that comes up from a community? And I'm going to use one, I'll throw it out here. In some communities, the words climate change is that's not a word people have resonated to. I do think that's changed a lot actually in the last number of years, but in some areas, people still see that word as politicized. How do you navigate that when you're trying to follow true science and you're trying to navigate that with community who may or may not like that term? They do know something's changed. They just don't like that terminology. How do you navigate that and keep that trust that we've all of you talked about, at the same time move people to hopefully being a good partner and us to being a good partner with them and helping our folks on campus not to offend when they go out and have those conversations, but do it in a respectful way? Thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I think you've got to find the common ground. What is it that you're seeing change that you're concerned about? Everyone's concerned about. It's not about blame. It's about really thinking forward of how are we going to resolve this so that change reverses. And I think that's the approach I've always used. And, my 20-year career as a faculty member was right at the intersection of environmental issues and livestock production. So I know a little bit of something about trying to bring parties together that have different viewpoints. But it is really finding that common ground on what you can work on. And over time, you slowly build up that ability to work. You're never going to agree on everything, but you can at least work together to try and change what you can agree is impactful without worrying about who's to blame for it. That's the approach I would use.
Robert, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that because a lot of people do run into that, that problem at that local level. There's somebody there it becomes politicized. And how do you navigate and maybe help coach a faculty member how to deal with that?
Well, you're talking about my day job there, Marshall. So, I mean, that's a lot of what you have to do in these leadership roles across the host of issue. And each issue is different. And I will echo what Wendy said. You just got to find a way to, to understand and kind of have some sensitivity to the perspectives of those that whose ideas don't align with the data and the science. But you can't win friends by making people feel that they're being silly to hold a perspective. So you have to find some way to kind of help them learn that while they may feel this way, there are others that feel dramatically different. And if there's some really pertinent examples you can use. And this just cuts across not only climate change, a lot of other things that happens in the academy where we have to get people to change their perspective. And I guess one of the ways that I have made some headway, and again, I think maybe Marshall, somebody alluded to this. You first of all, again, start with respect and you listen to individuals and you treat them with great respect, even though you vehemently disagree with their perspective. And at the end of the day, as that old saying again, if you first don't succeed, you try and try and you try again, but then quit because there's no sense of being a damn fool about it. So
One of the things that I'm reminded of is during my time at the University of Missouri, I would take deans on a road trip once a year.
yeah,
We'd go to a different part of the state, and I would give them a sense of sort of the issues and how issues were perceived in that particular part of the state, and that there were things that would make life a whole lot easier if they would just think before they spoke on certain questions. Think through it, be respectful. Don't, this is not a time to argue, it's a time to listen and to understand, seek to understand. And then come back and maybe debrief and think about that. And I think it's really important in that space too, because having that knowledge as a senior administrator, and I'll use deans in particular, who are taking the sons and daughters from that state into their colleges and to their departments, understanding where those young people come from, it's really helpful in the educational process. I think engagement actually informs good teaching and good research. I think all those things. And so I want to go there next. I want to talk about.
Marshall, can I make a quick comment?
Jump in.
Just very, very quickly. So this department I'm part of, agricultural economics, is not it's not my background, but has done a lot of public policy work over time. And the alternatives and consequences model has served them well, where, it's not our job to go in and lay down the solution. If we can lay out and map alternatives and share consequences to inform choice in the local level, I think you can do a lot of good in building trust in the process. So just want to throw that one out there.
Dr. Barry Flinchball, Kansas State University, used that heavily during his many years here at K-State. And trust me, it still lives on here at this university.
Same here.
For anybody that knew Flinchball, incredible leader. Wendy, I'm going to go to you next. When we think about especially land grants, and I think non-land grants too, while they don't have extension as we think about it, they do extend and they do engagement. And so I think really what's happened over the course of history is the land grant idea has certainly been adopted in many ways by many institutions. So we have to be really thoughtful about that and understand that they're doing great engagement. Some of the best engagement in the world is happening on non-land grant universities, quite frankly. And I've seen it and modeled it and tried to learn from it. But as you think about that three-part mission, and I think, well, again, non-land grant or land grant doesn't matter. I think they're all trying to drive toward that. How does that help? What do you see as the synergies between, the research, the teaching, the engagement work? I know you see it. You're a dean of a college. You've certainly been a VP of a major system, associate VP of a major system there in California. How do you see that interaction looking?
Yeah, I think we still got opportunities to strengthen it, but just like you said, I think a strong research program informs a strong extension program and undergraduate or graduate education program. Similarly, that engagement can inform a really strong research program. Again, it's asking the questions, knowing what questions you want to ask and answer. And I think there was a question in the chat that I saw related to how do you figure out what those topics are that you need to work on? And one of the things that we in California asked people to do, our extension people to do, was a regular needs assessment. And so imagine if we were doing that all across, whether it was in a department or just with our extension units, and bringing those forward on an annual basis. That could help inform us how do we do this and how do we do it in a way that's engaged across all of the missions? Again, whether we're land grant or not land grant, understanding what those key issues are in our communities and being able to work together. I think just knowing what those issues are that we're going to focus on helps bring all of the missions together and think about how do we do that in all three parts.
Wendy, I'm gonna set you up with I'm gonna throw you a softball here. When we do a needs assessment, we tend to find the available, the easy to get to do our needs assessment. I know you well enough to know that you think bigger than that. Help folks think about how to get broader inputs, that if, in particular for that extension piece, so that we're not just listening to the choir every day. Give me some.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
feedback.
So, typically we would do the needs assessment as an individual, but what if we did it as an organization? And we solicited that input, maybe through an engagement summit. Maybe we do it by asking departments to form those needs assessment, and then they all come together and we let those top issues surface where there's a commonality, where there's urgency in particular. And we use it that way to inform what we're going to work on rather than at the individual level. I think there's ways to do it in today's electronic environment. And most importantly, we need to be going out to the communities and asking them. And that's the step that we've got to get implemented in a number of places.
I'm going to go to Robert next. I'm going to keep the same theme, Robert. In thinking about how to determine the needs, you're sitting as a chancellor, you're looking at a state, a region, a country, and a world. I know one of the things you've done recently is launched the first engineering-based College of Medicine in the country, I believe. Very unique. Need drove that. You saw an opportunity, you saw a need. Talk people through a process that you look at as a leader in determining where you move next. I think people need to hear that.
Well, to me, a lot of it is driven by, of course, your own capacity of your institution. It's critically important that you have a very clear perspective of where you have a comparative advantage and where are the areas that if you invested a bit more time and energy, you could add another point of excellence. And that's how I've approached this issue in every place that I've been. And so, but in true disclosure, the Carl Illinois College of Medicine, not to correct you, most honorable Dr. Stewart, is not the first engineering-based college in the U.S. It's the first engineering-based college in the world.
There you go.
That's our story, and we're sticking to it. But let me tell you why this particular idea came into being. My predecessor came up with the idea, and it was my job to implement it. And that was about 8 years ago we started down this path. And the whole notion was that if you think about it, and I think this is a good lesson for some other things as well, in terms of new ideas and how do you bring them into being, is that in many ways, medicine has not been changed significantly in terms of how it's taught and how it's practiced. And so for us, it was, how do you leverage your comparative advantage? To start a different kind of medical school, because there was no room for us to start a traditional medical school. It just was not going to work. And so the notion is we're highly regarded and for our College of Engineering, one of the best in the nation, if not the best in the world. And then how do you create that interface between engineering and medicine? And I can tell you it was a brilliant idea. You can imagine starting a new engineering-based college of medicine where you have to want to be an engineer as much as you want to be a physician. And then how do you marry those two or integrate those two? And comes to find out there are a lot of young people out there who want that kind of experience. Our first year, we had a person who was on the faculty at Harvard who basically quit to come to Illinois because this was the kind of training that he wanted. And he was among our first graduating class. So I guess what I'm saying is that sometimes we have to think out of the box, think about our comparative advantage. As we think about new opportunity, then how do we leverage that to create something that's fundamentally a game changer we've now created a coalition of over 40 universities from around the world who want to copy or learn from our curriculum and shift their medical schools the way that to the degree that they can, because it's all about producing from where we sit not just a medical doctor, but medical innovators, people that are going to innovate in medicine, because these young folks have to create something every semester. So you drive that innovation and creativity mindset, and we think that's going to lead to better outcomes in health and healthcare, and lead to new innovative medical devices and cures than perhaps what we've seen in the past. So we think it's going to be bigger than just the way that we're teaching. It's about a cultural shift, as we were talking earlier.
Jay, I know that you oversaw one of the largest academic institutions in the country when you were you were provost. And one of the things that I think a lot of us admire about the Purdue University is just the incredible work they do across so many sectors. And you think about engineering, you think about agriculture, so many things that are touched by that institution. And one of the things that Robert just said, and Wendy said it too, is that you've got to see a need. And then you've also got to have capacity. You got to either have it or build it. So help walk people through that. You've got people on this today that are county extension agents. You've got full professors. You've got administrators. Sometimes you'll see a blinking light and say, man, that'd be great to do, but maybe that's not for us. You got to be strategic. I know you've sat there and made those tough calls sometimes. Talk to me about it. Regardless if you're at the county or the university, highest level, how do you make that call and understand this is an area we need to move into or build capacity around or partner to bring more capacity to us? Give me a sense of that process, that leadership process you've gone through. And that's transdisciplinary work at every level.
Well, I think it starts, with Robert's point about knowing yourself. I mean, know your strengths, know what capacity you have, know what resources are available and what you're good at and what you're not good at. I think you start there. And then, Marcia, you're trying also to get your head around the problem and the issue you're trying to address as well. I mean, is it a major central issue in the state or not? I mean, is it more of a niche thing? So you're trying to gauge the magnitude of the issue and then map what you've got available to bring to bear against that. And then you're thinking about partners. I mean, you don't have to tackle these things alone. I mean, Robert's point about radical partnerships is a good one, because maybe we don't have, all of the resources, but if we work with someone else in the state, a higher ed institution, an industry partner, someone else, together, a state agency, we could do this. And yet we may be on point to provide the leadership to pull and convene that group of individuals together again to go and tackle the issue. So I think, it's about, knowing yourself. It's about getting your head around the magnitude and the importance of the issue. And then it's thinking about, where could I acquire the resources and the partners to go and make a difference on the issue? And that gives you, and that can work at every level. I mean, a county educator can think about the same process and think about local partners that they could engage. And it may be their convening power is what they're really bringing to the party in the end. And as affiliate of a higher education institution, it does give you a lot of credibility, no matter what they say about trust more broadly.
So really what we're talking about is not only the content, the content we hold and we are good at, but also the connective power we have.
Absolutely.
So I want people to think through that. You don't only have to be a content deliverer. You can be a connector, and in doing the connections right, you can actually be the lever that causes bigger things to happen that you would have never been able to do by yourself anyway. So it doesn't mean you can't play in that space. You just have to play differently. You have to play a different role. And I heard Robert talk about convener. I've heard Wendy talk about that same thing, being that connective tissue that causes things to happen. Well, guys, we've got about 3 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Jay first. You get the last word, one of the last words. Jay, I'll give you a minute or so. If you had a wrap statement you wanted to share with this group, what would it be?
Yeah, for me, relevance is a central issue among our campuses right now. And this old notion of engaged scholarship and engaged transdisciplinary work can be absolutely a cornerstone of ensuring that we are relevant to the communities that we serve. And so I just challenge the folks listening today to take what we've said, do a lot more digging on their own, and again get out there and see where their institution can partner and make a difference in their local communities.
Robert, I'm going to give you the next word. You got a minute or so. What do you think?
Well, I just build on what Jay said. I think as we were saying earlier, we're in a period where there's not a lot of trust in higher education institutions and our ability to educate young people, that we are providing them a one-sided education, if you will, and that we're not doing research on those things that matter. And I can tell you the stuff that we've been talking about today, how do you leverage the land grant mission? How do you leverage extension? How do you leverage the more contemporary issues of being engaged with the public to find solutions together as partners? To me, is going to be one of the best ways to rebuild that trust. And we got to show up for our communities. We have to be embedded in communities. We have to collaborate and treat them as equal partners. And over time, I can tell you, the world will once again begin to see how critically important our institutions are.
Wendy, you get a last word here?
I'm going to say unique value. And I really appreciated that Robert brought up that not everybody needs the same medical school others have. Similarly, not everybody needs to have the best engineering school. There's a lot out there. Where do you bring the unique value? Because resources are limited. We need to remain relevant, and we're going to have to focus. And I think that unique value is how we do it.
And I'm going to wrap up by saying a couple last words. I had the opportunity probably about 10 or 12 years ago. I was out looking for some work on engagement, and I came across this video clip by my friend Robert Jones. He had been interviewed. He was up in SUNY system at the time, and these were his words that he said. He said, if we do public engagement well, public support and public funding will follow. I will be the first to say that I wasn't real sure about Robert Jones when he said that. I thought, was that really true? I didn't know if I'd ever get a chance to check it out and try it. But I made a leap a year or two later to the University of Missouri, and I will tell you that public support and public funding followed. If you do public engagement well, and we're finding that here in the state of Kansas now, if you do it well, public support and public funding will follow. And it's not just about the funding, it's not just about the support, but it enables you to do grand challenges, to deal with interdisciplinary problems, and bring transdisciplinary teams together to do the big stuff that I think we all want to do for the greater good of our society. Thank you for allowing us to be with you today. It's been a pleasure. Again, Robert, Jay, Wendy, thank you for being with me. I have enjoyed this ride tremendously. It has been the joy of the week right now to be with you three guys. So thank you a lot for the opportunity. Thank you to USDA and NIFA for the opportunity to share as well. With that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marshall. Thank you, speakers. Doug, I see that you turned on your camera. Do you want to say a few words before we put up the evaluation poll?
Oh, I will echo what's already been said. What a wonderful panel. What long-term friends and colleagues here. The background wealth of information, just tremendous. And I put a note to the panelists in the chat box. I think what we've done is maybe provided some insights on how to encourage you to actively participate in these partnerships and these opportunities for transdisciplinary work together. I think that is a strength. I think that's the foundation of being a land grant and a public institution, is cutting across different disciplines and being cutting edge in what we do and how we address our community needs. So panelists, I couldn't ask for more. Thank you so much for your time, your expertise, and being a part of the webinar today.
Thanks so much,
Thank
Doug. I
you.
couldn't have said it better. So just before we log off here, I know we're a little over, we have the poll going, so you can go ahead and fill that out. I am sharing the slide for our next webinar so that you can go ahead and sign up for that. I'll also send an email out. We've been having a few questions about whether this was recorded come in. So yes, it was recorded. I'll email everyone once that gets posted. So you'll know once the recording's in. And with that, I'll just thank everyone. Please fill out that poll that you see popped up and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
USDA is an equal opportunity provider, employer, and lender.